All right. Okay, so this is a review session for test on Monday, and it covers let's go over this real quick. Chapter 13, which is political changes in the United States. Chapter 14, economic changes in the United States. Chapter 15, social transformations in the United States. Chapter 16, slavery in the United States. And chapter 17, manifest destiny. That door just like swings open. I don't know. You can close it if you want to. Will you maybe like put the blinds open so people know they can come in? You don't have to pull them open. You can just like twist them if you want to. So it's 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. I think the two biggest ones, the two biggest chapters, like in terms of importance, is going to be chapter 14, the economic stuff, and then also the parts on like slavery and westward migration. So it's kind of like 16 and 17. We didn't cover a lot of 17, but 17 kind of like touches on various, so let me say this again. Westward migration, although that's mostly chapter 17, right? And manifest destiny. All of the other chapters talk about westward migration in some capacity. Does that make sense? It's like a theme in all the chapters. So I think that's an important thing to pay attention to as you go through and study, because you can't talk about slavery without also talking about westward expansion of slavery into places like the Black Belt, those like deep southern states that are going to be growing cotton. You can't talk about chapter 13, the Industrial Revolution, without talking about new transportation methods that make people move. And you can't talk about chapter 14, I'm sorry, that was 14. Chapter 15, which is the social transformations, without saying like, hey, people who were unhappy with the situation, like, moved out west and like formed little utopian communities, and so like it's wrapped up. So that whole idea of migration is important. And it's not one that you can necessarily study vocab-wise, but understanding the different ways people reacted and that this migration westward is a common theme. So those are our chapters. I also, before I want to start, there is chapter 15, which is the social transformation one. There's a couple sections in there that we didn't talk about at all in chapter 15, which was like literary movements. Like we didn't talk about the transcendentalists. We did not talk about, there's like artistic triumphs, I think is one of the like sections in your textbook. You don't need to know a lot about that, but please know some of the examples of authors and some of like the painters who are becoming important. Like just be able to like recognize them. I don't even know so much for this test per se, but on the AP test, I just want you to be able to recognize, like, if you see the name Herman Melville, he wrote Moby Dick, which was written right in this time period. If you see, like, Ralph Waldo Emerson, he's one of the transcendentalists. Being able to, like, make that connection. It's like a vocab thing. Yeah. Yeah, but they did. Or, yeah, you didn't, they did. Let's hold off on it. I'll probably just excuse you from it. I want to finish this. So just check in with me. That's on me. All right, so the first thing that we're going to go over is chapter 14, some of the economic changes going on. From the broadest standpoint, that's not going to be very easy to see, that orange color. Let's try this. Is that better? Looks like it's Halloween. From the broadest standpoint, the very first thing we did is we said there were two major transformations going on. The first one is going to be the Industrial Revolution, and these overlap. The Industrial Revolution, and then the Market Revolution. My recommendation would be to go through, we did a note-taking guide, which is on Schoology, that talked about the factors that led to the Industrial Revolution. So you got to know that like you can't talk about the Industrial Revolution without talking about mechanization. Does that ring a bell? You can't talk about the Industrial Revolution without talking about mass production and some of the things that are required to mass produce. It would be really good to know the people, some of the people that are these inventors inventing these new machines, Like, the easiest one that we've talked about again and again is, like, Eli Whitney. But, like, Samuel Slater, Robert Fulton, Samuel Morse. That chapter might be the most important in terms of people that you could know and say, okay, Samuel Morse, he invented the... Let's put it this way. Morse code. Telegraph. Morse, sorry. Did it sound like I was saying Morris? Sorry, Samuel Morse. That's just me slurring words because I'm tired. So that connection. So Samuel Morse, telegraph. Robert Fulton, steamboat, right? That kind of thing. With the market revolution, this is like transportation. Again, market revolution is about how we get stuff to people and how people use transportation to get themselves places. The Industrial Revolution is about how we're making stuff. And the mechanization part of it is all about like making things going from making things by hand to making things with machines. And that totally is a game changer. Just like today, the internet is a game changer for how we get stuff to people and how we order things. Like it's that big of a deal back in these days. So that's chapter 14. Now, in terms of like a little bit more in depth. So I just said, okay, here's the big picture. That note-taking guide has the effects. Make sure you know some of the effects of the Industrial Revolution. And then getting a little bit more in depth, this is where the regions are going to be important to know. How did the Industrial Revolution affect the Northeast? How did the Industrial Revolution affect the South? How did the Industrial Revolution affect farmers moving west? So we have like new steel plows. Like the name John Deere, which most people know, like he's one of the first to like revolutionize or mechanize farming in the Midwest. The McCormick Reaper, which is like I'm not great with farming lingo and vocab, but the Reaper is like something that like helps harvest crops, right? And it's mechanizing that process. So the regions and how the regions are going to be. So it wouldn't be a bad thing to know, like, okay, can I describe some of the characteristics of the regions? I think we did a handout that was like I had you draw 3 boxes. And I had you guys read a little bit about a region, and then kind of we jigsawed it together. So that would be good. Also, it would be good to know about the immigration piece in terms of Chapter 14. How were immigrants contributing to the Industrial Revolution? Cheap labor, what types of challenges did immigrants face? How did immigrants affect labor unions? How did the Industrial Revolution affect the lives of women? So can you provide examples of how women had new opportunities? So you might say something like, for instance, in the New England region at the Lowell textile factory, they are going to be hiring lots of teenage girls and women in their 20s and 30s to work in the textile factories. New opportunities. Now, that doesn't mean life radically changes for women. Most of the girls that worked there were younger. They're still going to be going back to their family farms, helping out, and they're still going to be expected to get married and be like, you know, their primary role will be expected to be in the domestic sphere, like at home. But we see some changes. This whole unit is a good unit where you can think of like how were women affected by the changes in other chapters. So think about this one, like chapter 15 is all about social transformations. That is a chapter where women find new opportunities to spearhead some of these moral reform movements. And that's a good chapter to know names as well from chapter 15. So like if you see a name of a reformer, like what cause would they be associated with? That's like the association game. This unit is full of vocab association. And that's a big hint for you guys. You're going to see that tomorrow, or Monday, not tomorrow. Lastly, make sure you know how like the Industrial Revolution is also influencing other aspects of life. So like slavery is influenced by the Industrial Revolution because the cotton gin increases the demand for cotton, plus all these new factories, these textile factories in the Northeast, or in the North in general, are going to increase the demand for cotton. So they do overlap, and so know that as well. So that's 14, I guess, in a nutshell. Do you have any other questions about chapter 14 or any of the other chapters? Like off the top of your head? All right, I'll go over a couple of things from chapter 13 that I want to make sure, because it's been a while. I think this will be a good use of our time, and we'll do this for about 10 or 15 more minutes, and if you guys have more questions, we can. Make sure in chapter 13, I said that there were two major changes politically. First off is like voting. Who's voting? We are... Yeah, so we're going towards universal white male suffrage, and that's something that is a big change. So we have more people voting. And this is in terms of like presidential elections and also statewide elections as well. The other thing that's changing is political parties. So in this time period, it would be good to know the evolution of political parties. At the beginning of this time period in 1800, how many political parties do we have in 1800? I've got a 2 and I've got a 1 and I've got a 2. Let's put it this way. In the election of 1800, the revolution of 1800, who becomes president in 1800? Jefferson, right? And we have 2 political parties, right? Because it's like this, and actually the first time we even had 2 political parties was in 1796. So like this is the beginning of, we have our Federalists and our Democratic Republicans. And the Federalist Party is going to fade out after what event? Do you know?
The War of 1812, the Hartford Convention?
Well, so yeah, the War of 1812 is the event that's going to really cause the Federalist Party to kind of lose support. I mean, think about it. They're like supporting Great Britain, and now we're at war with Great Britain. And then like the vocab term, the Hartford Convention, that's more specific. That was like their last-ditch attempt to like basically make the argument that they, like, you know, that they wanted to. They were hoping that people would kind of rally behind this idea that like, no, we shouldn't be at war with Great Britain. The problem is like literally as this convention was set to meet, the war ended and the treaty was signed, and everyone was like, yay, literally like that. So by 1816, the Federalist Party is gone. The Democratic Republican Party will last all the way through. And this time period until 1824 is when we only have one political party, right? This kind of time period of era of good feelings. This election of 1824, that one is one of your vocab terms. It's called the Krupp bargain. Look into that one. You have 4 candidates running in 1824. They all claim to be Democratic Republicans, but they're very different. This is the one where Henry Clay, Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, and the other guy are all running. John Quincy Adams becomes president, even though he didn't get the most electoral votes, even though he didn't get as many popular votes as Jackson. And this is when we see the split. And so we get the Democratic Party, and then the party that will eventually come about, the other party is the Whig Party, although there's like a time period, about 8 years, where you have like people running as what were called national Republicans, but eventually it'll turn into the Whig Party. The one thing I do want to talk about, and the whole reason I'm doing this political party evolution, is because we talked about this in class, but it's been a while. You got to know about Andrew Jackson's presidency. So we talked about controversial topics during Andrew Jackson's presidency. That's a big one. Andrew Jackson is president from 1828 until 1836.
Can you say that location?
Say that again?
Can you say location again?
Yeah, so Andrew Jackson was president. He's elected in 1828. He'll actually take over in 1829, and he will be on his way out after 1836. So 1828 to 1836. And in Jackson's 2 terms, there's a lot going on in the country. There's a lot of like controversial political issues. One of the things going on, by the way, is this like
attention, please, Gregory Robinson. If you're in the building, could you come to the main office?
Come on, Gregory. So like one of the things is more people are voting, which is part of the reason why Jackson is able to get elected, because these people who weren't voting that were from poorer classes, they like Jackson. He's kind of like seen as the common man, right? Even though he was wealthy and he like really wasn't all that common. He did come from like not that well off of an upbringing. He was not that well educated. He's the first president from a western state. He served in the military, fought in the War of 1812, not any of the world wars. But so then when he becomes president, there was some controversial issues we talked about. One dealt with Native Americans. Yeah? There were some court battles. You should know the vocab terms associated with Native Americans trying to like basically win their argument and win in court, which is not going to work out for them, even though the Supreme Court does rule in their favor in one case. This is going to lead to the Trail of Tears, which will be in the 1830s. The Trail of Tears is like 1837. There's a vocab term, the Indian Removal Act. Just look over those and make sure you understand the connection between those.
Robinson, if you're in the building, could you please come to the main office?
This is the same kid. A second thing going on in Jackson's term is the whole issue of the tariffs, right? High tariffs, which protect which industry? Farming. What do tariffs protect? What are the tariffs on? So they're taxes. Do we know? Do you know?
Does it protect like the people in manufacturing and like industry?
Yeah, it's manufactured goods. So the tariffs are specifically targeting manufactured goods. And so when the government is passing tariffs during this time period, if you are an American manufacturer, that means your foreign competitors have to pay more to send their goods into your country. That helps you as an American manufacturer. And we talked about this. So like the early industrial revolution, like it's not like America overnight becomes an industrial powerhouse, right? We talked about how it's like the baby, they're like stumbling around trying to get their feet. Like you need protection. Do you know how people baby-proof their houses? Why do they do that? Yeah, so the kid doesn't die, so it doesn't like fall down the stairs or like slam their head into the cupboard or what. I mean, like that's like, think about it. Tariffs are kind of like baby-proofing your industries. You're trying to help them out. You're trying to like make sure they don't get out-competed. And so, but if you're from the South or even from the West too, like tariffs are not necessarily a great thing if you're producing agricultural goods. And so this becomes kind of a controversial issue. South Carolina in the 1830s tries to like straight up nullify the tariff. They try to say, we're not going to enforce this. And this is one of the controversial issues during the Andrew Jackson's first term. There was like a compromise. You could look that up. Henry Clay's involved. Anytime you hear the word compromise, like Henry Clay's a good choice. So, third issue during Jackson's presidency that's important to know is the whole idea of the spoils system. Remember talking about this vaguely? Spoils system refers to giving government jobs to people who support your political party. Awarding government jobs to people who support your political party. And so what that looks like is, hey, you campaigned for me. You donated. Thank you. Like, that was so nice of you. Would you like this job? Hey, you, the guy from the other political party, you're fired. Oh, you don't like it? Well, he can do your job just as well. Did he get an interview? No. What does it matter? He interviewed while he was campaigning for me, right? And so this like tradition becomes very common practice. And both parties start doing this, but it really starts under Jackson. He fired a lot of people. It kind of breeds corruption. Because you're not awarding jobs by merit, you're awarding jobs by how loyal they are. So that's called the spoils system. There's another word for this, by the way. The spoils system is the exact same thing as what's called party patronage, awarding jobs based on party patronage. So those kind of go hand in hand. The spoils system is literally where you're a patron of the party and you're awarding jobs based on how loyal they are to your political party. So keep that in mind. The last issue that is controversial during Jackson's presidency is in his last term. It's over the Bank of the United States, specifically the Second Bank of the United States. If you remember, in a nutshell, the first time the government ever created or chartered the Bank of the United States was during Hamilton's years in his financial plan. It was supposed to help the country in terms of economic stability, to give loans to farmers, to give loans to industrialists, to give loans to people to help stimulate the economy. It got rechartered in the 18-teens, so we had a second Bank of the United States, and during Jackson's presidency, he was on a mission to kill it. He didn't think it was a good idea, and he was opposed to it. And so when there was a bill presented to him to recharter the bank for a third time, he said no, he vetoed it. And those people who were more like nationalist-minded, no, the government should be like creating a bank and depositing its funds in its revenues in a Bank of the United States, they went nuts about this. Henry Clay tried to run against Andrew Jackson, basically making this the issue. Like, the bank is good, Jackson is vetoing it like a monarch, like abusing his power, Jackson bad, and the country was like, no, the bank is bad. I mean, there was a lot of people that voted both sides, but Jackson got reelected pretty easily. And so Jackson made it his point, a priority, to stop depositing federal revenue or revenues into the Bank of the United States. He essentially killed it, and it wound up being one of the reasons why the country spiraled into a depression in the 1830s. 1837, there's like this mass panic. One of the other reasons why the country was in financial hardship during that time period is because too many people were buying up land in the West. There was like a lot of land speculation. Have I talked about speculation at all in here? So if you're a speculator, you're just guessing and you're betting. You're like if you speculate in the stock market, you're like buying stocks hoping they're going to go up. If you speculate in real estate, it's like, I mean, pick your show. Flip This House, or what are some of the other ones? Do you know what I'm talking about? Fixer-uppers, right? They're real estate speculators. They're trying to flip houses, hoping they could get an increase with, a deal on a house. So like land speculators, they were buying up big chunks of land, hoping the value would go up. I mean, because people are moving west. Problem is like when that happens, it creates bubbles. Like eventually there's too much land bought, not enough people to move out there, and so a lot of people were buying land on loans, or like banks were loaning people money to buy land. And then all of a sudden, if you can't pay that off, all of a sudden that loan is gone, and it like the bubble collapsed. Plus the Bank of the United States is closed, and it all kind of led to financial downturn in the 1830s. Yeah.
So people didn't like the West because it was seemed to be centered on people that were like it seemed to be oligarchical, but then it closed and they're like, well, crap, now what am I gonna do?
Sort of. So the question is like the bank, people were against the bank because it was aristocratic and it was a rich man's club and it was only helping wealthy people. And the question was, and then it closed and the country's economy collapsed. Yes and no. Like the bank, the people running the bank were not elected officials. The people had no say. So I can tell you 100% it was undemocratic, like completely undemocratic. It was ran by private individuals who were wealthy, and they were making money, a lot of money, because the government is investing its revenues. Think about it. Like if the whole city of Dearborn, all of the city of Dearborn was going to like dump all their revenues into one bank, that'd be a pretty important bank, right? Now think about the federal government's dumping all of their revenues into your bank. Like that gives you a lot of power. And so the bank has a lot of power. Well, what happens if the people running the bank are selectively giving out their loans? Like, yeah, we're going to give out loans to these people. Or they tend to benefit like one political party over another. And so to a lot of people, the bank was undemocratic. It was favoring wealthy industrialists. And they just thought it was the epitome of like aristocracy, the opposite of democracy, right? And so Jackson kind of being like, yeah, I'm looking out for the little guys. I'm going to close this freaking bank. He did. And instead of depositing it in the Bank of the United States, they deposited it in the pet banks, which were like banks friendly to Jackson. He spins the wheel on its head and turns the tables. And the problem was the Bank of the United States did provide economic stability, and it did give out loans, and it did help the economy. And so all of a sudden that was gone. It was part of the reason why the economy collapsed in the 1830s. But overall, from 1800 to 1850, the economy does well. Like, it grows. Like, the American economy is growing. It just has time periods of ups and downs and ups and downs. I mean, we go through this all the time. Think about the last 20 years. The economy went up, and then there was a huge, they call it the Great Recession, down, and now it's coming back up. And so it's just kind of part of the deal. So those are all of the controversial topics with Jackson. I only went over those because I think it's easy to forget to look into the details when I was talking about just the overview of Chapter 13. So that's that. In terms of, I think Chapter 15 is one that I don't necessarily know if we need to go over a lot. Like, you just got to look at the movements. We said there was like four primary ones, like four primary social reform movements. We said temperance, abolitionism, women's suffrage, and the move towards a like public education for all, for at least like a basic level public education for all. Just know the people that are associated with those and understand which ones gained more support and which ones gained less support. And in the end of the four major ones, which one becomes the biggest as you move closer to 1850 and 1860? Which of those movements becomes the most focal, or the focal point, the most central? Slavery and abolitionism, yeah. So, and then in terms of the slavery chapter, just reread through that. I would really recommend reading through the, or at least looking through the extra handout that I gave you guys that we read a little bit of in class. I think it does a good job summarizing slavery. Make sure and this is not so much for the test on Monday, try not to oversimplify the slavery piece. Like, keep in mind the complexity, that not every person, like the vast majority of people in the South did not own slaves. Do we know this? Like, the vast majority didn't. And those that did, the vast majority of slave owners only owned like something between 1 and 10 slaves. There are an elite level that owned 20, 30, 40, 50 slaves, but that's like very rare, extremely rare. But those people are really powerful politically and from an economic standpoint. They're like the elite of the South. The South is a much more stratified, like rigid social hierarchy in terms of like, social classes. It's very much more defined. Like the upper classes are not, they're not rubbing elbows with the poor landless whites. In terms of gender, like there is pretty rigid definitions of like what men and women and their roles are. The gender roles are more rigid. And then also make sure you look through and read about the limited opportunities for African Americans. So there are 250,000 free black people in the South in 1860. But there are 4 million enslaved people. 1 in 7. That's insane. I think that's pretty much it. Make sure you look over the stuff about Texas. And I would look over the reading guide questions. I would watch a couple crash courses. I think that wouldn't be a terribly bad thing. If you want, like for Robbie, I printed off a couple DBQs. If you want to like look through how you might game plan a DBQ, you could do that. For people that are, if you're actually watching this, let me see if I have the copies right here. I could probably just hold them up. I wouldn't be able to do, if I could find them. Shocking, I can't find the things that I'm looking for. Does anyone find that surprising? Here they are. Got them. So, real quick, I'll hold these up. I guess you'll be able to pause it, right? Even if I put it up there for a second. So here's one of the DBQs. This one is on the era of good feelings and whether or not that's an accurate label. How is sectionalism increasing, but nationalism also increasing? So there's that one. And then here's the next set of documents. And it's kind of nice that you can do this if you want to. So we got some maps. And the last ones. And then I have one more on African Americans, and it asks about, this one's actually a really tough one, but it's a good one in terms of the slavery piece. It says, from 1775 to 1830, many African Americans gained freedom from slavery. At the same time, even more became slaves. How could that both happen? And analyze the ways that both free African Americans and enslaved African Americans responded to the challenges. And so what this question is asking is saying, like, you need to talk about how after the Revolutionary War, all the northern states got rid of slavery. So many African Americans are gaining freedom, but what happens in the South? The reliance on slavery is increasing because of, and it would ask you to talk about the cotton gin and mechanization and the spread of cotton. And so this one is how the North essentially got rid of slavery, although, there was still discrimination and many challenges faced. And then it also says, how did it expand in the South? And then ties it together saying, how did people resist their bondage? Which I like this one. This one actually, I think, really, really caused a lot of problems for people, whatever year that was, that it was given. But I think it's a pretty straightforward one if you know about the topic. Here's E, F, and G. Let's make sure I can. And H and I. Okay. So, any other questions before we wrap this up? Cool. Yep. Although I'm going up north. So I'll be up north. I leave tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. and I'm driving 3 hours up north. And then I'm driving 3 hours back tomorrow night. So I won't have access to internet on Saturday. But Sunday I will. I'll probably check my email Sunday around noon or 1, and I'll answer a batch of them. I'll probably check it again at 7 and answer a batch of them, and then I'll probably go to sleep because I'll be tired. But yes, email me. The sooner you email me, the more likely I am to respond. All right. Good luck. You guys are going to kill it. Or crush it. That's probably not. I don't want you to murder the test. I just want you to do well. Okay, bye.